Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo. As always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please be sure to download the app and share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And if you like what we do, please, we're all over social media, X, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube. We post all of our Veritas interviews on social media. So please be sure to like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And if you like what Joe and I do, we get into a whole lot of trouble every Thursday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time, where we talk about the atrocities of the day. And there's numerous atrocities to go around to talk about. So today we're very pleased and honored, and I mean honored, to be welcoming back to the program Eduard Habsburg. And we're going to be discussing his new book. That's right, Habsburg of the Habsburgs. And we're going to be discussing his new book. And this is going into the breach, okay? Building a wholesome family in a broken world. Habsburg lessons from the centuries. Why I love talking to Edward. I feel like I'm reaching back into history. Where Joe and I are talking to someone who's a descendant of one of the most influential families, literally in all of Western civilization. That's not hyperbolic. That's true. The Habsburgs are very impactful and influential over time. So we're very pleased to have Edward here. Now, some of you might remember our last interview with him and know who he is. Having said that, Eduard Habsburg is Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. His family reigned in Austria, Hungary, Germany, Spain, and a few other places. Also known as Archduke Edward of Austria, he is a diplomat and social media personality. Edward and his wife, Baroness Maria Theresia von Gudenus, have 6 children. He's the author of several books, including the children's book, Dubby, The Double-Headed Eagle, volumes on Thomas Aquinas, James Bond, and Harry Potter. That's quite an array there, Edward, I have to say. Aquinas, James Bond, and Harry Potter, and he's written novels and screenplays. Eduard Habsburg, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, our brother.
Thank you for having me back on your show.
And like I said, this is gonna be a great conversation. A lot of people don't like to talk about the fact that the family is in shambles, and we're glad that you wrote this book, and we're going to get into it. I know our audience is really going to love this conversation. So, having said all of that, because I know I have a big mouth, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Resinello, and we'll have a great conversation.
Edward, we always begin with the prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father,
Amen.
Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, Edward, we have a common bond. We're Catholic, which means we're all part of the same family. My family, like yours, have a lot of children. My great-grandmother gave birth to 17 children. 12 lived, 5 died. I have 5. My wife is one of 12. Her sister is Joe's wife. He's my brother-in-law. So we're all one family. I wholeheartedly agree with this book. I am so happy to discuss it because it's so important. Family is where it all begins or it all ends for a society. And building strong families is how we make the world a better place. For those who may not know who the Habsburgs are, just a brief, description. I think it's a good place to begin. Obviously, those who follow history, particularly Western civilization, would be familiar. But in case someone does not, just give us a brief history of your family and how it kind of stems all the way to you.
Well, the Habsburgs popped up in history around the year 1270. By then, they were a small family of counts between Switzerland, Germany, and France. And then one of them was elected on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. And suddenly we were there in history, and we haven't left European history for the next 850 years. I would say the Habsburg family is the family that represents family. We always had lots of children, lots of marriages, some marriage politics, and all of us Catholic, all of us Catholic, and building strong bonds of Catholic families all over European history. And we still are Catholic. There is a few hundred of us around the world. We have a WhatsApp group nowadays where we exchange things, where we post links and sometimes cat videos. And yes, so that's the Habsburg family for you. They were very famous ones. The first Habsburg was famously devout, and the last Habsburg emperor was very, very famously devout. That was Blessed Emperor Karl, whom many in America know and consider a friend and an example. So that's the Habsburg family in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Edward. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we have Eduard Habsburg. Now, his new book is available at Sophia Press. We're going to post the link in the description so you could go and buy the book. And because you know Joe and Joe, you're going to get a 15% discount. All right. So if the book itself is incentive enough to go and read it, 15% off, that's not too shabby either. Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. Edward, I don't think I'm being so judgmental of our modern culture, not just in America, of course. This is worldwide. I mean, Europe is a mess. All over the world is a mess. There are pockets, thank God. But everything is, if two people are to get married, okay, we can't even assume they're going to be a man and a woman, but if two people are going to get married, it's transactional. It's like a business partnership. You can break it off at any time. The government tells you can, okay? Reason, by the way, it's not about commitment. Now, I just want to preface this, and I'm going to throw it over to you. I drive my son to school before I do the show, and while I was driving, I was thinking about this interview. I was thinking about what is the meaning and purpose of my life. I mean, in the past, it certainly hasn't been about family and commitment, but now it is. All right, and it has been ever since we had our foster son with us, who's about to become our adopted son. And it's like that is the meaning of life. Your fulfillment comes in God and participating in what He does, which is God forms us. Well, we bring children into the world to form them. In other words, and guess what? It doesn't really get much better than that. And I don't care how much money you have in the bank. I really don't. Okay. And that has been discarded. That was Western civilization, certainly before the Reformation, certainly before the Enlightenment. Okay. Where are we at that prompted you to write this book?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything you said just now, Joseph. Family is the place where you find happiness, where you find your fulfillment. If you have lots of children, and I strongly encourage people to have lots of children in my book, then you will become that man that God wants you to be, and that will be the happiest version of you. You will make your spouse, your wife happy, you will make the children happy, and you will make society a better place. But all of this, as you said, has left us in little drips. It sort of went away after Reformation, after Enlightenment. I would say the final dam breaking was in the 60s, and now we are in a place where most people, if they ever get married, they stumble into marriage because they live together anyway, because their relationship is like the last one in a long list of relationships that you had where you live together with people. And finally, a woman manages to hold a man long enough so that he agrees to do this thing and get married, and she can wear white and all that, which is usually the point where the relationship breaks apart. So I'm watching and I'm seeing that on the one hand, my own experience and the experience of many of my friends' families is deep happiness, incredible adventure, the greatest thing you can do in your life. And on the other side, you see people who are absolutely desperate, unhappy, alone, glued to their screens, and don't know how to go about it. So I say, well, wouldn't be a bad idea if a Habsburg, with my personal, but also with my family experience, would write a little book. Also, I can get away with more tough truths because people think, oh, he's weird, he's a Habsburg anyway. They don't expect me to live in the modern world. So that's how I wrote this book. And I think the starting moment was two girls who walked up to me after a Blessed Karl talk I gave in Dallas. And they said, where do we find a husband as good, as chaste, and as upright as Blessed Karl in this crazy and broken world? And I said, well, I'll have to write a book about that.
I'll tell you, for how would he answer? I probably wouldn't have written a book. So I would have said, a good start would be go to church. Go find if a man is at church on Sunday, the odds are, okay, he's going to probably be a guy that you want to be with. I want to, Joe, if you don't mind, I just want a quick follow up. I think, Edward, that what you're doing, when Joe and I, when we use the words going into the breach, it's not just a tagline. Okay. Bishop Olmsted wrote a letter. It was a few years ago to Catholic men in America saying you have to go into the breach. It's one of the reasons why Joe and I do this. It's not it used to be where those who didn't want to get married would say, well, that's just not for me. It's okay if you want to get married. Now it's an outright attack. And that's why what you're doing, what Joe and I are trying to do, what many others are out there doing. I'll give you a quick example, and I'd love your comment. And this is just one woman online, all right? But there's many, many of them, okay? That basically constantly posts on X. Constantly, don't ask me why. I don't follow her on X. I don't know why I see her posts. Anyway, about I'm 42, I have no children. I wake up in the morning and I have a martini. I take a hot bath. I go to the gym and I have no ties to anyone. And she's dancing. So like a video of her dancing. And I'm like, that is an empty woman. And men do the same thing. Don't get me wrong, but she's more prominent. She's got like millions of followers. That's what we have. That's why what you're doing and what we're doing is important. We have to now directly confront that. They're not indifferent to marriage anymore. They're directly attacking, saying it's not even the life you want to live. What are your thoughts on that?
My thought is, yes, you're right. We have to speak up very loud and clear in today's world. On the other hand, poor them. Nobody ever handed them the tools to do this right. They probably come from a background where marriage and family was not a good experience. Nobody ever taught them how to go about it. And they, like most people nowadays, stumble into their first intimate relationships in school and then continue from there. So one of the ideas of why I write this book is I want to give parents some ideas to pass on to their children before they even get into the dating market. I want young couples, when they get interested in each other, to give something in the hands. Like, okay, before we go even a step closer, let's think about it. All of that is inexistent. And media, our technocratical masters, the state, everybody tells you the same message. Go ahead, do whatever you want, change it tomorrow, it's okay. And we want to come with the other message. Someone has to say it, and it can be a Habsburg, for instance. But good on you for going into the breach. And yes, I want to say something at the end. My first book was very cuddly and nice and charming and all of that. The second one I'm far more nervous about because it's far more reactionary. I have to say how it is. It's reactionary. And in the States, many Catholics will like it. I'm pretty certain that in Europe, many people will be very angry about the things I say in there. Although I do it in a nice way because I'm a diplomat. But so you're right. It's far more going into the breach than my first book, which was far more milquetoast.
Right. Eduard Habsburg is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. His new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. Now, please, it's available at Sophia Press. We encourage you to support our Catholic publishers. You could click the link in the description and you'll get a small discount. I'm going to hand it over to Joe, Edward, but I will say this. It reminds me of what you just said. It reminds me of the famous Satanist from the 20th century, Aleister Crowley, said his commandment was do what thou will. And that's exactly what's going on out there. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
I want to get into the tips for dating in a moment, but I want to comment on something you said earlier because I think it's very important. And I think you have a very unique voice because you're located in Europe, you travel around, you speak to a lot of different people, you see a lot of different things, you have knowledge on a lot of different cultures. In America, as in Europe, it's very materialistic, clearly. There is a very popular talk show host in America. I'm not going to mention his name. I don't want to put him on the hook, but he made a lot of money in insurance. And he's a very nice guy, to be honest with you. I listen to him. He has a lot of good things to say. And he wants his legacy to be passed on to his children. So he's a smart man, and he did a study. How do we pass on a material legacy to our children? Now, this is something a lot of people would be concerned about. And he noticed in that study that few families maintain that legacy. And your family has maintained it for centuries. So I want to bring that up because I think it's very important. And this is something he missed. He was looking from a worldly perspective as to why that's the case. And I wish he had me on the show because I would have said the reason why is because you're not rooted in God. Your family is rooted in God. And that's why we're talking to you today, because there have been many families and many famous people in the history of Western civilization. But yours is unique because yours is rooted in God. And here we are talking to you. So that gentleman is missing it. If we are in the material world and you want to pass on your legacy from a materialist perspective, and we all do, I have 5 kids, I want to leave them something. It's just normal. Teach them what's important. Live your life and ground it in what's important, and you will. What are your thoughts on that? Because he missed it. You didn't. Please speak to it.
Well, Joseph, as they say, you and I park our cars in the same garage.
I love it.
I, if you open my book and you look at what to look out for to find a good spouse, my first point is not he or she looks hot, but my first point is you have to check whether you share the same faith. And if you look at my Habsburg book, that's a core element too. And why did the Habsburgs for 800 years preserve their values and their core ideas? Because from the first that I just mentioned before in the introduction in the 13th century to the last emperor, and of course, thank God to many of us today, God was the center of our life. When Empress Zita, whose beatification process has now begun, the wife of the last emperor, met with Pope Pius X just before she got married to Blessed Karl. She visited him, or after they got married. Anyway, she went alone with her mother to visit Pope Pius X. Pope Pius X told her, "You got married to the heir of the Austrian throne," and she said, "No, I'm not. He's not the heir. The heir is Franz Ferdinand. You must have mixed it up." He said, "No, he's going to be sitting on the throne. I don't know why." And then he said, "He is God's gift for the Habsburgs always having been faithful." And he might not have known that, but the first Habsburg in the 13th century made a grand gesture that I described in my first book. He borrowed his horse to a priest that had to bring the viatic to a dying man. And there was a terrible storm and lots of water, so he couldn't get across a river. And he gave the priest his horse. And when the priest brought the horse back, to give it back to him, this count said to him, "Far be it from me that I ever ride on a horse that has carried my lord. Please keep it." And the people in the area said, "This family will receive a prize from God for this generosity." And the prize was that we remained faithful to the Catholic faith. And that was the core of everything. Everything we are is built around that core. And I want to suggest to every family to build your relationship, your engagement, your marriage, your births, your children, and everything around God. If you don't do that, I don't know how it works. If you do that, nearly nothing can bring you apart.
No, absolutely. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we have Eduard Habsburg. This is a great conversation. He's written a great book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. It's available at Sophia Press. Click the link in the description. You'll get a discount because you know Joe and Joe. Let me say this to you, Eduard. I have a question for you. I spent a good number of years, unfortunately, in my adult life, and I guess that was part of God's plan, away from the church, not practicing the faith, not living anything even remotely resembling what a Catholic man should be. Okay. And then my wife and we had some challenges as far as natural childbirth. So we embarked on a road of adopting a child. So as I mentioned earlier, our foster son, he should be adopted over in the next month. We're almost there. It's been a process, but here's the thing. Coming off my former life, if you want to call it that, I had no idea what kind of father I was going to be. I knew I ought to be a father, but I had a lot of doubts. What am I going to do? I had a lot of baggage from my life. Things that I've had to put down and struggle with sometimes. But yet I say I knew it to be right. I need to have a son. My wife needs to have a son. We need to have a child in this house. Okay. It can't just be the two of us. Okay. We felt called to it. And he gave us a gift. Our son. Okay. I didn't know what I was doing. Okay. But I went forward. What advice I framed it that like that to ask you this. What advice would you give to new parents, especially like someone like me who is feeling a little, I hope I could do this. I want to do this right. I want to form my son properly. I think you know where I'm going. I'm going to throw it over to you.
Great question, Joseph. Great question. I would come with an example from Habsburg history. Of course, I speak a lot about Blessed Carol and how to find the perfect husband and the perfect, chaste, upright, saintly, praying, rosary swinging husband. But not all of us are like that. And it's a long path. It's a long road to Tipperary, as they say. And one example in my book is the husband of Empress Maria Theresia. Maria Theresia is probably known as the most Catholic of all Habsburgs. She had 16 children. She took over the throne as a young woman and had 16 children and reigned for 40 years. And her husband was the only Freemason we had in the family. He was a Freemason. He was not very devout. He was very distant in church matters. He went to Mass, he went to the sacraments, but he never spoke about faith. And he wasn't a good example in that, but he was an incredible example in one sacrament, and that was confession. And he never tired of telling his children, go to confession. He said, your soul is a battleground between the angel and the devil, and you want to go to confession to preserve your soul. And I'm going to do this every week, once a week. And he went before every Sunday Mass, he went to confession and he spoke about it to his children. And his children saw him going to confession all of their lives. None of them ever forgot that, although he was not that super devout, super saintly father. This one thing transformed all the lives of his children. And when he died, God gave him a very special gift, because he died, you would say, in a terrible way. He died after going to a theater without any chance to call a priest. He felt unwell and he died really quickly. But it was a Sunday and he had gone to confession and to Mass in the morning. So it's like God saying, well done, my servant. And the message of this is, my father always says, children don't do what their parents tell them. Children do what the parents do. Try to be an example by leading and doing. Spend time with your wife. Really pray together. And as a father, have a rosary in their pocket. As a father, go to confession. Your son will look up to what you're doing, not what you're telling him to do. That's in my book, and many, many other things. I'm sure you will do this really, really well. But I remember exactly when our first child was there and looked at me with these expecting eyes. And I said to her, I have no clue how to do this. You think I know what I'm doing? So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I'm going to throw it over to Joe before the break, Edward. One thing I appreciate that you said, and Joe and I try to emphasize it all the time. There are some people who have it pretty easy, not easy, getting through life as a Catholic. They live devout lives and everything else. And for many of us, it's a struggle. But I always try to emphasize to people, like, look, it's a struggle. Jesus gives us the means by which we could get through the struggle. But the Catechism says that explicitly in 409. All of human history is a history between man and the forces of evil. You don't just walk through, and as Joe always says, you don't just float into heaven. You're going to get up there. You're going to be battered and bruised. But I love your story that you told about, even if it's a matter of, I'm a sinner. It's like you reminded me in that story of the tax collector beating his chest. The guy knew he wasn't devout, but yet what does he do? He goes to God and beats his chest and says, yes, Lord, please forgive me of my sins. It's a beautiful story. Joe Resinello, we have a couple minutes before the break.
Well, I just want to comment on that one seed, because that's very significant. He was a humble man. To go to confession means you're humble, and that's beautiful. Little seeds, as a father of five, I'm always conscious of them. Planted in a child through actions can go a long way. And I say that to my wife all the time. We've taken our children to the shrine of St. Joseph in Montreal. It's the largest shrine in the world. They'll remember that. Like when I'm long gone, they'll remember that. We pray with our children in the house, the rosary, and it's not easy to pray with 5 kids under 10. Sometimes it's very chaotic, but they will remember that. And these are gifts that you're giving to your children. Speak briefly about that, because I don't think people value those type of gifts in our materialistic world in Europe and in America. But that can save your life in the end, as it did with your relative.
Yes, I believe that it's the little things that will drag us across the finishing line. It's it's the rosary in your pocket, even if you don't take it out all the time. But the fact it's there, it will remind you, and you will perhaps grab it and say, even a decade or two. If you teach your children the little survival set of tools that you need to go to heaven. As you said, pilgrimages. I say um, in Austria there's the tradition of the Herrgottswinkel, which means a corner in your room for God. Have one saintly image in every room. It can be a cross, it can be a crucifix, it can be an icon, and do use the time to turn towards it when you say a prayer. Have a place where you pray the rosary together, even if it is tough with small children. But most of all, if you say the rosary, if the children, for instance, see when something really tough happens in your life, a catastrophe, the first reaction of the parents is neither to curse nor to yell, but one of the two drags the other one to the icon and says, now let's pray first. Let's pray. The children will never forget that. And I have, for instance, I have next to no remembrance of my grandmother, but I remember her hands holding the rosary. And my children know that they can go to my mother and call her up or write her a WhatsApp message and ask for her prayer, because they know that the rosary lives in her hands. And they all pray the rosary because my mother and we pray the rosary. And I think, we've discarded all these simple little tools like blessed water, like pilgrimages, like images, like sacred images. We've discarded all this in the 60s because we're grown up Christians now. We don't need this anymore. I am very, very aware that my ancestors used all these means because, as I said before, they will help to drag you to hobble across the finishing line to heaven. And it's a job for you to pass on to your children, but teaching it to your children will help you as a couple to grow in it. It's win, win, win.
Absolutely. Edward, you're on X, right?
Yes, I am very much.
What's your X handle for our
Oh, it's
audience?
very easy. You look for Eduard Habsburg. There's only one. I've never found another one. So if you look for Eduard Habsburg, you will find me. And I have a number of followers where I can still react to almost everybody who writes to me, direct message, reacts to my tweets. I try to be nice and wholesome. So please come and visit me on X.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We have Eduard Habsburg, his new book. Please go out and buy it, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. It is available at Sophia Press. Quickly, Edward, outside of Sophia Press, where else can our audience buy the book?
Well, you can go, of course, to your famous online retailer if you want to. But if you're in the States, I would really go to Sophia Presses. And of course, most of all, I would click the link in your description, because then they will get a very nice part of the price off.
Absolutely. So stick around, everybody. We have another great half hour with Eduard Habsburg. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello. We're way in the breach with Eduard Habsburg. He's written a new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. It's available at Sophia Press and other retailers, but we encourage you to buy it from Sophia Press. Click the link in the description, and you will get a discount, because Joe and Joe don't want to waste any time. I'm going to throw it right over to Joe Resinello.
Edward, we alluded to it on the other side of the break, dating. I can't speak for Europe, but I could speak for America. There's a terminology for dating. It's called hooking up. And it's not dating. It's basically sleeping with each other. I mean, that's what people do. They abuse alcohol and they hook up. I mean, that is what goes on in colleges. And you know, this is the interesting thing. It goes on in all colleges. And sometimes parents assume because their kid is smart or their kid's going to a Catholic college, not all Catholic colleges, let me just be fair, but a lot of them. I went to a Jesuit college. It was pervasive, hooking up. There was a famous documentary of Boston College, which is a very, very prestigious Jesuit school. One of the professors did a whole study on how people don't know how to date. Now, these are exceptional kids in Boston College. This is not like, you know, random people. These are high achieving kids that are going to do amazing things in life. They don't know how to date. This is a Catholic school. What are some of the tips that you give? Because frankly, I think Western civilization needs those tips.
It's quite ridiculous because the things I write in my book are most of them are duh. You know, it's like I'm saying things that everybody always knew the last 2,000 years, but I think the last 10,000 years at least, it's basic stuff. And what I believe is that most people nowadays, as I said several times in this interview already, nobody hands them the tools to do it right. And what you describe, children beginning with hooking up culture in school. And, you know, in my book, I say the girls try to have a boyfriend and be intimate because it's cool and you're the cool girl if you have a boyfriend. And if the others have one and you haven't, you're even more ridiculous. So you just go along because you want to be a cool girl. Boys go along because they're stupid anyway. And if girls throw themselves at them, then they're even stupider. And nobody gives them any tools how to deal with that. And they just get dragged into it in movies, in TV series. It's the same. So they never experience what it means to actually meet a girl without hooking up and to seriously consider. What I'm saying in my book is don't go for that hooking up culture, because with every new relationship that you begin and break off again, your chance of having a lifelong, fulfilling, wonderful marriage where you will be in love with your wife even more after 30 years than at the beginning, your chance for that gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you're not able anymore. What I'm saying is you should you should put all your money on red. You should go for the big thing, for the big love, for the big bet, and try to find a wife for your life. And of course, this sounds totally crazy. And people will say, impossible, impossible. Hormones, they're animals. We can't stop them. And some people are stupid enough to say, oh, they're young. Let them have fun. We were young too. I would like to put these people over my knees and slap them, because you are pushing your child onto a path that will deeply lead into unhappiness. So what I'm giving is a few hints of how to go for the big win. That's what I'm trying to propose. And yes, in Europe they will say I'm crazy. In the States, I think I'm understood a bit better. The Americans really believe in being upright and good deep down in their souls. It's in your DNA. It's from your pioneer spirit. In Europe, we're far more cynical. So yeah, we'll see whether people will react to what I wrote in this book.
One of the things, Edward, in my experience in speaking to some younger people, and again, people know I'm Catholic. You know, it's like I don't walk around preaching the gospel all day, but I make it clear that I'm Catholic. As let's say, as I'm getting to know someone, younger men in particular. The one thing I find that resonates with them, and I love your comments on this. See, back in the day, let's say for argument's sake, you might, let's say as a teenager or a young adult, go out and have sex. Okay. Pornography was not as pervasive then. It was very difficult to get if that's something that you had on your mind. Now it's just obviously it's all over the place. Where I'm going with this is what resonates with younger men in particular is that they're becoming slaves to their passions. That because it's not just going out and hooking up, it's also the pornography. It's also, Joe mentioned at his college, you know, getting drunk. It's beyond that now. Everybody's getting high. So like, you know, so it's all just escalating. And my argument to some younger people I've met, and I've heard this online too, is that younger men in particular are becoming aware that they're becoming enslaved to to this culture, particularly the sexual aspect of it, not just going out and hooking up, but also with porn and everything else. And they're trying to do something about it. They're actually trying to go on lockdown when it comes to a lot of these things. Now, I want to get too graphic here on the show, but certainly the porn watching and all of that, having sex, trying to hook up. I've known a number of young men who said, I got to put the brakes on this. This is not the way I want my life to go. What are your thoughts on that? The idea of you're being that the family frees you. The sexually liberated lifestyle is what actually enslaves you.
I couldn't agree more. One of the words that I use a lot in my book is chastity. And I define chastity not no sex, but sex where it belongs. What I believe is that this can be done. It is possible to live like this. You're not sick if you don't have relationships, if you don't watch porn. You're not weird if you don't do all these things, but on the contrary, you are free, you are strong, you're a knight. If you're a man, you're a knight. And the prize that you will win is lifelong happiness. I think I have a large family, quite a women if you grow up with siblings of both sexes. You understand so much. Most people don't have that luck. Most people grow up, with one sibling or alone. And then they have to find their way into the world and take the cues from television or from school. So what I'm saying is the message is it's possible. It's possible. We're weak, broken human beings. We're sinners, but so great. And the terrible price you pay for your body, for your mind, for your habit, it's really worthwhile to go that way.
Edward, Joe, if you don't mind, I just want to follow up on that for a second. Edward, can you hear us?
Yes, you were gone for a while.
Oh, okay. All right. So sorry about that. We broke up a little bit. Edward, you're still with us, right?
I am.
Okay. Sorry about that. What are your thoughts if I said it like this? Okay. I want to ask you this about friendship real quick. It might not be, let's say, something that you necessarily touch on in your book, but how about just from a man-to-man point of view? Okay. I think I'd much rather trust a man, in other words, as a friend who has a family, is committed to his family, than someone who basically you could tell by their lifestyle, whose passions control their reason, rather than the other way around. The man who has a family, I can automatically assume is responsible, is committed, is self-sacrificing. Am I being judgmental, or what are your thoughts on that? Because I, quite frankly, and again, I'm not judging because I lived that way for a long time in my life. But I think I much more readily trust someone who has a family as opposed to someone who chooses not to.
One of the points that I like to make from time to time is take a look at our political leaders in Europe. Most of our prime ministers, presidents, ministers don't have families. They're either singles or they're living a lifestyle that I wouldn't appreciate. And in Hungary, for instance, my prime minister, he's a family man. He has children. And our minister of family was like that. Our ministers, we try to live as family, because if somebody is a family man, if he has children, if he is faithful to his wife, if he helps the family survive, if he teaches people, he will automatically have a different kind of maturity to face even crisis in the state than someone who, as you said, is a slave to his passions. A priest friend of mine always used to say, what's the difference between the man and the animals is the prayer before lunch. It's a little joke, but it's saying we are not animals. And a society that tries to tell us that happiness is living like an animal, is following your every urge and trying to discover as many urges as possible. This is absolutely wrong. This is wrong. And I think this is part of a crisis that our population has with their political leaders. We imagine if you had a president who was married, had a huge family, and would speak about faith, and you would know where they would stand. They would know for which values they stand. But there is many such people who are not. So you're absolutely right. And I think it's a part of the crisis of our society. In the past, it wasn't like that.
Yeah. Eduard Habsburg's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're discussing his new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. Please buy it from Sophia Press. You can buy it from the large retailers, but we prefer if you would support our Catholic publishers. Sophia is awesome. Click the link in the description. You'll get a discount simply for knowing Joe and Joe. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
I want to talk about what Edward spoke about regarding chastity, because it's important. And we got broken up a little bit, and I think people have to hear this. It's possible. You see, I think I always try as we talk, Edward, because we're on the radio, someone could be driving in the car and they're like, what are these guys talking about? That's impossible. No. It's possible, but it's a grace. And I'll just tell you, about my life. You said people fall into things. I grew up Catholic. I went to college. I got pretty decent grades, but you just fall into that lifestyle. You're 100% right. Many people, good intentioned people, they just fall into this lifestyle. But in my 20s, I did come into a relationship with the Lord, and I took my faith serious. And I basically said, if I'm going to be Catholic, this has to stop. And I struggled with it. But through fasting and prayer, I became chaste. And I lived as a chaste man from my late 20s till I got married at 43. Now, people could say, that's crazy. You're lying. No, I'm not. People thought I was crazy. My family thought I was crazy. My friends thought I was crazy. But I met a good girl, and now I have 5 kids, and I'm married 11 years, and I'm happily married. I love my wife more today than I did when I married her, and that whole time, God formed me. Now, I did it wrong, because he's supposed to form you when you're a teenager into your early 20s, and then you get married. I didn't do it that way, but I did it later, and God formed me. So chastity is possible, and that time you're chaste, God will form you and prepare you to be a good husband and a good father and teach you the virtues you will need to do that. Your thoughts, because I'm going to be honest with you, you're spot on, and people could hear what we're saying and they're like, these guys are crazy. No, we're not crazy. This can happen, and it's the way to do it.
Joseph, God bless you. What a beautiful testimony. I absolutely agree with you, and I believe we have to speak far more about that. In my book, I have several pages with examples of Habsburgs who were chaste in an unchaste world, and afterwards had especially happy, especially long, and especially tender marriages. And not only Blessed Karl, who most people know, but there is one example in the 16th century. We had Ferdinand I. He was emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He was a devout and chaste man, legendarily chaste. In a time, if you were the future emperor, you could get any girl you wanted. And in that time, he was chaste, he prayed, and when he got married, it was one of the most beautiful and longest marriages of that time. Everybody spoke about the love between these two. They had lots of children. Several of them went to the monastery. Several of them had very happy marriages. And you have to imagine, that was at the same time that Henry VIII lived. And Ferdinand was shocked to see a ruler totally letting go of his self-controls and following his baser passions and leading the Catholic Church into catastrophe in England and beginning all that, what happened afterwards, because he couldn't get a grip on himself. We are not animals. Repeat that to yourself. We are not animals. I agree with, it's true that it has become more difficult than ever to live chastely. As you said before, pornography was not everywhere, naked images were not everywhere, girls were not throwing themselves at you left, right, and center. It was easier in a way to live chaste before. It's very difficult today, but it's ridiculous that it's not possible. On the contrary, and what you get in exchange for that is I guarantee you, you will have a very long, very happy, and very fulfilled marriage. And what you said before, Joseph, I agree 100%. I love my wife far more than I loved her when I got married to her. People say that's not possible, but that's true. That's true. This kind of marriage is possible. And you will get it if you play along the rules that I set out in my book, that I suggest to you. You will have the greatest life, really.
Absolutely. Edward, when I was back in New Jersey, I'm in Arizona now. It's going on about 3 years. I went out for breakfast with my best friend, and we were talking. We just happened to be having a conversation. And he said to me, he goes, "Let me ask you a question." Now, thank God, before I left, he listened and he came to me, called me up. He says, "Hey, you told me you could do a good priest for confession. I think I might want to do that." So I feel very blessed that I was able to help him in that way. But this was before then, and he's always been Catholic, and he was kind of going back and forth with the faith and everything else. But he asked me, he said, he goes, "Why is it that our grandparents were who had nothing, no money, nothing, were able to have these big families?" And as Joe mentioned earlier, his grandmother had 17 kids. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother had 8 kids. They had nothing. And I answered him just directly. And I said, well, they had God, and they understood that there's an order, there's a logos to the way you live your life. And part of that, central to that, is having a big family, having children. And I think people don't understand. They look at, like, Joe's going through the first 10 years of his 5 kids, right? But the next 10 years of those kids growing up is going to be different than the first 10. It starts to grow into what Hillary Clinton would call a village. You know what I mean? It takes a village. When you have 10, 5, 10, 6, 7, 8, 10 kids, okay, guess what? It becomes a village. It becomes your kids are now helping you. They're contributing to the growth of the family. Some of them are getting married really young, and they're having their own kids. And this is what people understood to be the right way to do things. Your family obviously is more prominent, but a great example of that throughout the centuries. Lots of kids. Lots of kids. In other words, it's the logos of things. And they understood that, and that's why they were able to have those big families without having a lot of money. You know where I'm going, Edward. I love your comments.
I'm in Rome since 9 years, and Italy used to be the country of children. In every film, in every painting, everywhere there were children, 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 children. Then something broke in the 60s, and if you drive through Rome nowadays, you don't see pregnant women, you don't see children. Every family has maximum 1.5 to 1.75 children, and if you tell them, why, when they see you with your children, they say, "Oh, beautiful," and then you say, "But you could have that too." Ah, no, 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 that's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. And to that, I would say what you said is right. Our grandparents knew what belonged to a good marriage. But I would go further and say we are living in the safest and most economically sound, health sound time ever in the Western world. And we can't afford to have children. While our grandparents, who had far less money, had far larger families, and they managed to survive. But we don't in our world we live today. So one of the things I say in my book is, I think with God's help, and if God gives you children, because as you know, Joe, it's not automatic. Some people, they get married and they stay together, then they earn money, and then with 39 they decide now it's time for our child, and then of course it doesn't happen, because that's also another reason why you should begin early on in your family to have children and not wait endlessly. I believe with God's help, if God gives, I believe it's a vocation for everyone to have a large family if they get married. And I don't believe people who say, well, some families, it's just the right number is two or something like that. I personally don't believe that, just out of my experience of what great it did to me, to my children, to society. So I want to very strongly encourage people not to let themselves be blown over by the spirit of the times, by the idea, no, or like many children, that's like a bonsai tree, that's your personal hobby. I believe every family should have many children. Greatest gift for you, for your spouse, for your children, and for society.
No, absolutely. And I look at it this way, those who are, I'm not talking about those who choose to live a Catholic single life. Some people do choose a celibate life, and
Oh
God bless
yes.
them.
Oh
What's
yes.
that? Yeah.
Yes,
But
I had an interview yesterday with someone who chose to live such a life, and it's wonderful and beautiful.
Yeah, because again, they are living a self-sacrificial life. They're giving their lives over to the Lord. I'll tell you one thing though, from a very, very, very selfish point of view, I'm so grateful to God for my son, because now I know on my deathbed, it's going to be my wife, and I am at least going to have one child there. I'm not gonna die alone. And that's a gift. I would tell a lot of these people, life ain't about, like that line in that a movie I heard, life's about, driving hard, living fast, and leaving a good looking corpse or something like that. It's a dumb, stupid, empty way to look at life. You can't even call it a philosophy of life. Joe, I think we have time for one enough time for one more good question for Edward.
I want to take it all the way to the end. Obviously, as Catholics, we believe in marriage is forever, till we both die, husband and wife. And that's part of the adventure. I'll just share with you what happened with my parents quickly, and then I'd like you to comment. My parents were married 52 years. My dad passed away 3 years ago in December. Um, he was 84. He had Parkinson's disease. He was an athletic man, and towards the end of his life, he was bedridden. My mother cared for him for 18 months in the house. It cost a lot of money. We're a modest family. My father was a barber, just to give you some, perspective. We had a live-in nurse at times, a hospital bed in the house, and my mother cared for my father, and he died in the house. It was the greatest example, and my parents gave me a good example, I have ever witnessed in my entire life, what my mother did. And it was at great cost. She's an older woman, too. She was 4 years younger than them. So she was in her late 70s and 80 doing this. I will never forget it. And to be honest with you, it taught me what love is. That's what love is. Your comments, because this is what marriage is, self-sacrificial love. And it's the deepest love one can show to another, as well as give the example to their children.
I totally agree with you. A friend of mine in Hungary who is also a Christian, he sent me a meme where you see a man carrying an elderly lady from a bed, and he said, "Ask God for the grace to become the parents of your parents when they are weak." And the same goes, of course, for couples loving each other. What I'm saying is the family is not just the place where you grow up and where you have experienced the love of siblings and all that, but the family is also ideally the place where you can die surrounded by your family, being helped along by your spouse, ideally, if God grants that, and being helped by your children. And as you said, it impressed you deeply to see your mother looking after your father. That is part of this incredible trust that a couple gives to each other. That's also why I believe that sex belongs into a lifelong commitment, because you really make yourself vulnerable in front of the other person in this relationship, but you know that this is the person that is ready to sacrifice their last years for you if you get bedridden, as you would sacrifice your last years for the other one if they get better. It's not even a question. But nowadays, of course, the temptation is there to push all of that away, to put it into a hospital. And I don't want to judge on anybody, but if God allows this, I would love to die surrounded by my family and at home, if this is possible even. And I would like to be surrounded by prayer, by my children praying with me, and giving them a good example by caring for my wife or she caring for me. So yes, the family is also the place where you learn dying and where you learn the ultimate love. All of that is family. It's the greatest and most wonderful adventure that we can embark on. And yes, thank you for that testimony.
Yeah, Edward Habsburg, one thing I will tell you is this, and this is what Joe and this is why Joe and I we gave our show over to Our Lady. We're hoping that conversations that we have, particularly conversations like the one we're having with you today, on the family and how to build a wholesome family, that will resonate with people. That the Lord will take this conversation and it's going to trigger something in somebody. Listen, there are many, many, many conversions that have happened over the course of of human history because God put a thought in someone's head. Just one thought in someone's, and perhaps we are contributing to that and help to turn this tide. And it is a tide. Look, if they could start the section, if the devil can start the sexual revolution of the 1960s and wreak the kind of havoc that he has, well, what could we do with God's grace? Everything. Jesus tells us that. With God, all things are possible. Even a couple of jamokes talking to essentially royalty. I hope you don't mind that I said that, Edward. This is not an accident. God's given us our walk-on part in the war. You know what I mean? And we're playing that part. Grateful. So Edward Habsburg, real quick, 30 seconds. You aside from the book, you got anything else going on right now, or are you just focusing on promoting the book?
Well, I'm focusing on my work as ambassador to the Holy See, where I work for Hungary and sometimes have the privilege to meet the Pope. We are happy about our first grandchild that is here since a year, and the second grandchild on the way, and the second daughter having gotten engaged. So things are continuing here in a wonderful way.
Absolutely. Follow Edward Habsburg on X. I do. So you can see what he has going on. Also, this will be posted on X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, and we will put the link in the description for Sophia Press. You click that link, you can buy the book with a 15% discount. And the book, once again, is Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World: Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. Edward Habsburg, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. We're thrilled when we have you on, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you soon, our brother.
See you soon again. Bye.
Thank you, Edward. And thank you all out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. And like I said, if you like what Joe and I do, we're all over social media, wherever you see us. Like, subscribe, share. Please share this video. Please share this conversation. We think it's very, very important. We thank you all for joining us once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.